So, hello, Andrew and Andrea, Discothèque. Thank you so much. It's really lovely to have you with us. I don't know when we first met. We met this year, didn't we, Andrew?
We met in person roughly a year ago. We had lunch in London. The way that we got introduced was I was a fan of yours, and we were doing a remix record. And I cold emailed you, and I just said, hi, I'm a fan, blah, blah, blah. Here's a link to our band. Would you like to do a remix? In exchange, and I would do one for you.
It was awesome. And check that remix here. It was Disconnect.
Yeah.
And actually, my friend Peter says it's the best work I've ever done. So so that's how we met. And obviously, Discotheque, fantastic band. You guys are really amazing, really beautiful electronic stuff with lovely vocals as well, Andrea. But first of all, you've got a new track just come out in May called Tiny Little Pieces. So
it's a maxi single. There's
maxi single.
4 tracks on it.
Tell us a little bit about that and how that came about.
You go.
Well, it had been a while since we released anything. And so we just wanted to, put things out in little pieces, just to keep things moving because, it's not really an album world so much anymore. Since you can release things digitally, it's like, why not just put things out as you get them sometimes and keep things fresh. And that was like a really varied little collection because Tiny Little Pieces is super upbeat and poppy. And then the other track on there, The Drip, is super down tempo and kind of murky. But we don't have a label, so we can do whatever we want.
Yes.
This is the world we're living in. It actually feels pretty good not having a label. Does it feel good for you too?
When I was in Stabbing Westward, we were signed to Columbia. So we were part of the big machine.
Yeah, totally.
Which was cool at the time because, we had a couple of hit singles. We had a few hit singles in the U.S. We were all over MTV. We were all over the whole thing. It was, we were rock stars. It was so grueling, man. We would put out a record and we would tour for 18 months.
Wow.
And then immediately write another record and tour for 18 months. And then did another record and the record was a flop. And I had just turned 40 and I said, that's the sign for me to get off this bus and it's just grueling, you know?
And that sounds horrible to me.
I didn't get in. I joined Stabbing Westward. I was 32.
Yeah. Wow.
So had I been 18, it would have been a lot different.
Yeah. People really underestimate the physical gruelingness of a tour as well. And when you're not 18, it's harder to cope with physically.
Yeah,
it is. It's really, you're sleeping in a bunk on a bus with 11 other guys. So there's 12 guys plus a driver, and it's your home.
Yeah.
And if you have any problems between people,
oh God,
and you're sat right next to them on the bus while you're driving to the next city, and it's like...
Amazing. So is that basically the reason you quit Stabbing Westward? Just because it was just too much? How long were you with Stabbing Westward for?
So what happened was their drummer quit in the middle of their first tour for their first record. And they were managed by the same company that managed The.
Right.
And I had gotten the gig I'll give you a little bit of history. So in the mid-'80s, I had a synth pop band in Cleveland called Exotic Birds. And we were pretty popular in the Midwest, and we had a video on MTV and all this stuff. And after a while, and the other 2 guys in the band were friends of mine from conservatory. We were 3 percussion majors, all hoping to get orchestral gigs. Put the band together as kind of a joke, and we got a record deal. It was really bizarre.
Awesome.
Wow.
And we toured a lot around the Midwest, and at that point this is 1981. The college radio station at the university was playing music I had never heard before. I grew up in a sleepy surfer town on the East Coast in Virginia, and the radio generally played Southern rock or classic rock.
I think you can relate, can't you?
Yeah.
Coming from Australia.
Coastal towns, yeah.
Yeah. But we were so out of touch and then moved to Cleveland, and it's a much bigger city than the city that I was in. And you turn on college radio, and for the first time I heard Depeche Mode and New Order and The Cure and Joy Division, and my head just exploded. I was like, I may not want to get an orchestra job. I think I'm going to derail. So the band, we toured a bit, and it was 3 of us that were conservatory percussionists. And I had graduated. We did a tour. We did dates with Thompson Twins and B-Movie, and we did arena shows with Culture Club.
Amazing.
And it was all really fast, really quick, and too much. And the other two guys said, you know what? This is not what we want to do. We want to get orchestra gigs. So we're going to go back and finish our degrees. So kind of left me in the lurch. So for a year, I had to put a new band together. And it was a bit of a revolving door. But in 80, my timeline might be a little wrong, 86 or 87, Trent Reznor became the keyboard player in my synth pop band.
But nobody's heard of him, so you don't need to mention him.
Right. So
that's great.
Well, it's just, so this is pre-90s now. So he's in my band for about a year and a half, and then he quits. And then suddenly, 9 months later, Pretty Hate Machine comes out. So he had been working on this project. Nobody knew anything about it. So anyway, Trent goes on, does his thing. Years pass. In 1993, The had just released the Dusk record and had toured Europe and had come over to the United States to do a tour. And the minute they got here, they played the K-Rock Weenie Roast in Los Angeles. And if you're familiar with K-Rock, the radio station in LA, they're credited with breaking Depeche Mode into the U.S. market. So the drummer, David Palmer, who had played with Matt for years and a bunch of other bands, he was in ABC, he was the drummer for ABC and other bands. He just got the gig with Rod Stewart, and he gave his 2 weeks notice to Matt after they played the gig at the Weenie Roast.
That's incredible.
And so Matt was talking to Trent, and he said, my drummer just quit. And Trent goes, I know a guy in Cleveland that you might want to check out.
Oh, man, like, hold it right there. So I get the picture here of you have a life of basically slipping backwards on banana skins into fantastic situations. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would say that happy accidents or being in the right place at the right time with the right skill group.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
being ready.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And Trent just recommended me for the gig. And a few days later, Dada was playing in Cleveland. So I met him in Cleveland.
Wow.
He okayed me as an okay guy, and he's like, okay, you can audition. And then for the next 2 weeks, on every tour stop, they would have drum auditions. So I flew to New York, which was their next stop, and I was the very first drummer that they heard out of the 6 or 7 or 8 auditions that they had.
Oh,
and there were like 20 guys a day.
Wow.
Coming into this. So we were at SIR in New York, and it was me, and there were like a bunch of big name drummers that had come in for the gig. And a lot of these guys weren't fans of they were great drummers, but they sat down to play the tracks, and they didn't know the tracks.
Right.
So a couple days after
you obviously did.
I was huge fan.
Yeah.
Huge fan. And a couple days after my first audition, they called me. They said, you've made it to the finals. The finals are going to be in Atlanta in about a week. So they had played a show at Sony Studios in New York, playing the entire set for their tour. And they had changed their style a little bit. The previous records, there was a lot of programming and synths and drum machines and things, right? Like, think of like Infected, you know?
Totally. That's samples all over the place.
So he got rid of all the samples, so it was more of actually everyone had to play. So the arrangements morphed a little bit to fit what he wanted to do. So they had done this live at Sony Studios, and I got a copy of it. And it was their entire set with all the new arrangements. And I woodshedded that for 3 or 4 days, flew down to Atlanta, walked in a little early, and I hid in the corner, and I watched my competition audition. And these guys, they only knew the original album versions of the track. They didn't know. I got up, and it was my shot, and Matt said, okay, we're going to do the same 4 songs that we did in New York. And I said, Matt, I've learned the whole set. Pick any other 4 songs. And he's like, oh, really? I'm like, yeah, let's do it.
Awesome.
So they called out 4 different songs, nailed them. Then they're like, okay, somebody will call you. And I go back to my crappy hotel that I was staying in, and there was a message that said, get out of that shitty hotel and come to the Nico in downtown Atlanta. You got the gig.
Oh, fantastic.
What I didn't know was that the gig started the next day.
Wow, man.
Oh.
So how did you cope with that?
Well, I called my landlord and I said, listen, I'm not going to be home for 3 months. Can you go upstairs and shut the windows? Luckily, she lives below me. And I didn't have any clothes. It was summertime, so I was in
wow.
shorts and I had a backpack and some drumsticks. That's all I had.
That's
So
amazing.
they gave me money to go to the mall.
You didn't
and
have
buy
any
clothes.
pets, so you didn't have any pets. You didn't have any
No
major
pets,
relationships.
no girlfriend, no
able to
wife,
drop.
no.
Just supremely
Awesome.
mobile individual who can basically go bang. I'm out the window.
You know how it is to be a musician, right? I had ups and downs throughout my entire musical life, especially with rock bands.
I mean, I was going to ask.
Things
'cause,
would go.
well, here's the thing. I was just going to ask. So what kind of situation were you in at the time? I mean, you weren't. Tell us what were you like? What were you wearing?
Well, I had a shaved head, actually. I started out in Exotic Birds and I had a full head of hair. And as the band played longer and longer, and we were just like this local band and never, ever really happened. And Trent moved on and became, Trent. And I'm still slogging along for 3 or 4 more years. And I'm like, I got to do something with my life. And we had a gig and I shaved my head before the gig. And I had like long blonde hair. And I walked out on stage and everybody was like, oh my God, is something wrong? and 2 weeks later, I had the gig. So once I did that, I thought, you know what? I'm going to shave my head for the rest of my life.
So
I think that had
it's the
something
follicles.
to do.
The follicles were holding you back. This is what you're saying.
I don't know, but it gave me a completely new perspective on myself the minute I looked in the mirror and thought, what have I done? It was at that time that my girlfriend said, maybe this music thing, and I'm like, there's the door.
So, hold that. So you literally had that conversation. It was time for you to leave it all behind.
I had that conversation with several girlfriends because things were great, things were terrible, things were great. And, if you're a musician who plays in a band, and I played sessions and played extra with the Cleveland Orchestra and stuff like that. So I was making some money, but there were some times where I wasn't making anything. And she was like, typical, like, my dad is the president at the bank. If he'll get you a job at the bank, we can have kids. And I'm like, no, man, I'm a musician.
But how am I going to fit kids in a backpack?
Yeah, it was, it's just, I've always, once I discovered music and discovered that this is what I wanted to do, all my ex-girlfriends refer to music as the other woman.
Right. Okay.
I want to jump to you quickly, Andrea, because you've been doing music your whole life as well, and I just wanted to hear a bit about your background, how it started out for you, how you decided you were a musician, and this is it for you as well.
I mean, there was no decision. It was just like, I can't remember not singing. I think I burst forth out of the womb, and instead of crying, I was like, ah! Starting when I was like 3 or 4, I was always singing, and the grown-ups were trying to bribe me to sing, and I just always did it. And so my parents put me in like choirs and things when I was really young and voice lessons. And then that's just always been my life.
That's awesome.
And musical theater.
Oh, musical theater.
Yeah.
He's seen
I've seen her
videotape of a production I was in when I was like 19.
What was the production?
Guys and Dolls.
Awesome.
I was Sergeant Sarah, the uptight one.
Oh, yeah. I'm not getting that. That's not coming across, the uptightness, but I'm sure you were an excellent performer. That's amazing. So you're basically a musical theatre.
When I was younger, yeah, but then I just sort of evolved, and I was also into a lot of like all the alt music of the 90s, like Tori Amos and PG Harvey and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't just all music theater. But I think that music theater does give you a really strong sense of melody, because melodies are so broad in the Broadway.
Absolutely. And acting and putting your soul into it, or making a song do something, I think is an important thing to do. Not merely getting the notes, but also, that thing.
Performing it. The emotional connection of it all. It's very going to the big place sometimes.
And that really comes across in your stuff. So you did you know each other?
How did you meet? How did it come together?
So after I quit Stabbing Westward, I was floating around LA looking for whatever was going to happen next. And so I didn't know whether I wanted to get another drumming gig, because I didn't really want to tour again, because it had beaten the crap out of me and I was over it. So I was playing with Zoe Bonham, who's John Bonham's daughter.
Amazing.
And she was managed by the same woman that had managed Stabbing Westward up until the end. And when I quit Stabbing Westward, she called me the next day and said, I want you to play with Zoe. I'm like, all right, it's a gig. But it wasn't a drumming gig. I was playing acoustic guitar and vibraphone. And it was just, we did like coffee shop things, you know, like we played like the Viper Room and all those hipster places.
Yeah.
And I was just looking for something. And our former manager, who managed Stabbing and managed Zoe, was looking for an agency in Los Angeles that would pitch the old Stabbing Westward catalog to film and TV. There was this agency that did placements for people. And I met Andrea when we went in initially just to talk. And you were working, and you said,
it was my day job for a while.
It was a day job. She just said, she was the assistant to this woman. She said, hi, how you doing? Met her. And at some point, I had done like an alt metal collection of music cues for potential licensing in a TV series.
And what did we name them?
Verboten?
Verboten.
Nice.
The band name. We used to make up band names for all these.
And those music
things.
cues fell into the lap of this production company called Original Productions. And they're the people who do Storage Wars. So they were doing this show called Monster Garage, and they were moving into the second season. And they weren't really happy with the composer they had from the first season. So they heard a bunch of my tracks, and they invited me over to meet them. And suddenly I was a TV composer.
Wow.
And this show, Monster Garage, literally just fell into my lap. And I thought, well, here we go again. But TV composition is so different than writing pop songs. I had to score a picture. I had never scored a picture before.
Wow.
So I had to fake my way through it, bought a bunch of orchestra libraries and stuff. But this show is mostly metal, and it was mostly like industrial. It's this guy, Jesse James. He's like a rogue motorcycle builder in Los Angeles at the time. He was a bad boy, so the show was basically kind of metal. Right. And so I did that show. They liked me. I finished it, did another season. Then they gave me another show. Then they gave me another show. So at some point I'm doing 4 or 5 series simultaneously. And at some point I needed a female singer. So I called the agency up and I spoke to someone who won't be named. And I said, it's a long story. And I said, I need a female singer. Can you recommend anybody? She's like, yeah, Andrea, my assistant. You've met her. She's great. So I had met Andrea a couple of times. I had no idea she was a singer. So she came over, sang on some cues, and then sang on more stuff for me. And then we did a Spanish-speaking children's album together, 2 of them actually, with this producer who wanted to do pop songs in Spanish to teach English kids, American kids, how to speak Spanish.
Lovely idea.
We did a bunch of really weird offbeat stuff. But so Andrea and I became friends and started working on more stuff. And she sang some of the Storage Wars themes, if not the regular Storage Wars, but if you watch Storage Wars New York.
Yeah. I mean, once again, it sounds charmed. It's like just magical.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there must be some dirt under your fingernails somewhere. There must be some.
Well, I mean, how many thousands of hours did you spend in your composer cave over 10 or 15 years?
Almost 20 years. I've done a little under 40 television series.
Wow.
My God.
In 20 years, I've written almost 11,000 music cues.
That's incredible.
I got the gig doing Monster Garage, and once I kind of settled in and everybody was comfortable with me, I said to myself, don't screw this up. This is way better than being on tour in a band. Yeah. The only person I have to answer to is the music supervisor and an editor.
Yeah. Fantastic.
And I just went for it.
So I guess at that stage you must have got the chance to sort of settle down, find yourself somewhere to stay, be in one place rather than all over the place.
Yeah,
it must have been a big, massive change in your life. Everything must have felt different completely.
Well, initially it was just panic and stress because I'm faking as if I'm a television composer, even though I do have a conservatory education. I'm a classically trained percussionist, so I took orchestration classes, and I knew all this stuff. I just never had to apply it to anything.
But that's how it always starts.
Yeah.
That's how everybody starts that way, and it's like you fake it till you make it, and then you figure it out as you go, because it's like so many people in film and TV, like all these composers now start out in bands, and then they just made this like natural progression into that, and nobody like knew what they were doing to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just
And
work at it.
if they looked like they knew what they were doing, they were really good fakers. Basically, that's how it works, isn't it? And the thing is, that imposter syndrome. I know people can take decades to get over that. Has that all gone away now? Are you comfortable in your skin? You certainly look it.
Yeah. It's amazing because once I have my musical career has been so strange and so varied and so crazy. If you look at the entire scope of it, and every day I kind of pinch myself and go, did I really do that? Did I really headline the Reading Festival with the on the main stage? Check that off,
Wow.
And when it, but once again, it's being in the right place at the right time with the right skill set.
Yes. So
Yeah.
you must. I mean, it's the way you tell it, the way you both tell it, and the way you met each other always seems like just total accidental, magical luck. That's just bang. It's happened like that. But I'm sure behind that, there's a lot of obviously you're prepared, you're talented, you're ready, you're always awake and alive to the possibility of something like that happening. Otherwise, you wouldn't have met those opportunities as they came up. Clearly, you make your luck, don't you? Do you agree with that idea? Or is that a load
To
of
some
rubbish?
extent, yeah. And I mean, and Andy has an incredible work ethic. Like, he always goes above and beyond. He doesn't hold back. And there's some people who'll do the minimum in the business because they're like, oh, I'm so talented. Like, they'll love whatever I do. But you really have to do the extra and be easy to work with. And then people will want to keep hiring you.
Absolutely. That's it. It's work, isn't it? It's work.
Yeah. So you guys started working together originally kind of through work, and then how did Discotheque come about from that?
Well, Andy got this synthesizer addiction.
I noticed some things with knobs behind you.
A couple. I had a barbecue and there was way too much wine consumed. And at the very end, I was talking to Andrea because she was the last person there, and I said, I want to form a synth band. I need to do something that's not television related, I don't want to go on tour or anything, but let's work on some songs. And so she finally agreed, and we sat down and this is the first time we had ever worked together as songwriters. So you have to kind of feel out how everybody works.
Yeah.
And I think there were a few odd moments as we're trying to work our way through the process, especially because even though I had played in synth-based bands, I don't think Andrea had ever done anything like that. So she's trying to adjust to the weird maniacal electronic bleeps and squiggles that I'm trying to force into a pop track. And she's just like shaking her head going, why can't it just be simpler? My brain doesn't work like that.
Let's write the song.
So
He's like, but cool sounds.
So briefly, Andrea, your songwriting background, would you be using piano or guitar or just singing?
I mean, I'd worked with a few different people, just mostly stuff for like film and TV for pitching to that. So, I love a good ballad, just like a piano and vocal, just very emotional things. So I'm all for that too. But yeah, different capacities. But I've always loved more of like a really like lush kind of cinematic sound. And we're still figuring out what our sound is, of course, because we're still relatively new.
Yeah.
But we do a lot of layers, and that's really kind of the fun part, is to like see how big we can get it without it being too crowded.
We have never played a live gig yet. We put the band together maybe 6 or 8 months before COVID hit.
Yeah.
Oh,
and so we've just been writing, and because we're not like, oh my God, we have to play a live gig, we will do 6 vocal harmonies. And, so if we ever do play live, we're going to have to find a couple of female background singers.
Or cheat.
We're very complicated.
Yeah, you can cheat, which everybody seems to be fine with. I was watching some of the Lollapalooza shows this past weekend, and I was like, there's a Mac right there, and they have no problem hitting spacebar and just getting away with it.
Well, this is the thing with electronic music too. One of the things you touched on there is the idea that you're always creating your own space and your own sound in your own environment. Whereas if you're a rock band, it's a fairly easy way to, there's guitar, bass, drums, and maybe some other instruments, but what those things, you roughly know the space those things occupy. But when you're using this kind of instrumentation, how big can I make it? How small can I make it? And you're in those places where it's not so connected to songwriting. It's more like you're building the instrument first, and then you're writing the song. So it can be almost sometimes opposite of songwriting. It can feel like that, but it's also a lot more work and whatever. But I was just going to say, so Andrew, was this like a return to the 80s for you, like the Exotic Birds days?
Yeah. So I still had, after I left Stabbing Westward, I got rid of a bunch of my instruments. I had a really kind of bleak period for about a year where I didn't have any gigs, and my advance money had run out, and so I was selling my equipment. It was right?
Yes.
So I ended up with 3 things. I kept my SP1200, I kept my Korg Monopoly, and I kept my SH101. And I got rid of everything else.
We can all see where this is going just from those 3 instruments.
And so as I'm working in television and I'm starting to become more and more successful and I start to make more and more money, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to buy another synth. Because I had a kind of an obsession with mono synths. That's kind of where my bag was. I didn't deal with any modular or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so I forget what I bought. I think I bought a Pro 1 was the next thing. And then I bought an Oscar.
Oh,
cool.
Beautiful synth.
And then I bought a VCS3.
Oh, wow.
In many ways, even more beautiful. Well, totally. I'm very jealous.
Well, with the amount of time I spent working in television, and I went from living in a crappy, and I mean crappy, 1-room apartment in Studio City to the house that I'm in now, which is...
It's interesting you're choosing these monophonic synths. So, I mean, a lot of people would say that means you're composing in a certain way. You're composing different lines running over each other rather than playing chords and melodies over the top. Do you think that the use of monophonic instruments has influenced the way you write music?
Pop music, definitely.
Yeah.
As far as music for television, because I had to work so fast, I started to pick up all the plugins, all the synth plugins, because you got to pop out 5 music cues a day, so you don't have time to tune. Because old instruments, how the tuning is whack on all those instruments.
And to have in total recall and have all the sounds come straight back.
Oh, sure, because somebody 6 months down the line is going to go, hey, I found this cue you did for this other show. Can you remove this and replace it with this? So you had to be able to pull the session up immediately and have all the sense. But for me, the TV composition thing versus the synth pop band, the synth pop band is way more closer to my heart. TV composition thing, I used all the plugins because I was just like, sounds like a Jupiter, whatever, it's fine. Nobody's going to know. But for the stuff that we did, it's also very time consuming because it's all done, and it's all done with the analog gear in the room. So when you get big Moog modulars and the air conditioner kicks on and 6 oscillators suddenly go completely out of whack, and now you're like, I got to spend an hour tuning just to play the parts.
You love it.
But it's awesome. It's awesome. And so as I kept acquiring more and more synths, my good friend Ed Buller, who you guys should meet, Ed was the keyboard player for the Psychedelic Furs. But he's a producer. He did all the Suede records. He produced all of Suede's records. Yeah. He produced White Lies. He produced Stabbing Westward, the last Stabbing Westward record that I was on. He plays in Node with Flood. It's this modular supergroup.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So Ed says to me, dude, you're buying all these monosynths. You need to get into modular. And I'm like, I'm scared of that. And he's like, no, you're a rack. Little tiny things. You just start small and you just build from there.
Yeah, that's how it starts. It starts small.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
So sad to see another addicted individual dragged into the horrible hole of Eurorack. I mean, I try my best to stop them, but nobody listens. It's you're obviously a sane individual, though, so...
Yeah, I mean, it was fun, but it was a completely bizarre world. And I'm like, I'm used to working with a monosynth that has a fixed signal path, right? I know how everything is. So now you're stuck with modules, and I'm like, wait, how does the VCA and the envelope generator, am I not patching this correctly? Because it seemed a bit backwards to me initially.
Yeah, you're basically you're really building from the ground up.
Yeah, but what I found was, unlike some of the monosynths, some of the modular stuff is just, you can create just the strangest, weirdest accidentally turn just enough and the entire thing comes to life and you're like, that's fantastic, but I can't use this in a pop song. What am I going to do with this?
Yeah.
So for me, the big challenge is when I'm playing with all this stuff is, okay, how is this going to fit into a song
So I
format?
was going to ask, so, I mean, this whole thing's completely wide open. Do you record everything you do and then keep it somewhere for later?
Yeah, I'll just go to the DAW and I'll track 3 hours of me and I make sure that, if I find something I like, I let it repeat 20 or 30 times, because what you do is go snip it out. And what I have is also, the modulars are all clocked to the DAW. I use the Analog Solutions Mega City sequencer.
Fantastic.
Right.
Because it uses MIDI note 0, so I can put clicks in my DAW, send it to that, and then I use that to clock the whole room.
Shout out to Tom Carpenter there. Nice one.
I have a lot of Tom's equipment in my collection.
You haven't been tempted to get the Colossus then? Oh.
I don't have any room, unfortunately, and I have an ARP 2500 that's being refurbished.
Wow. I was going to ask, so you bought your first synth you bought after you stripped down to those 3 items, and you got a Pro 1, was that right?
Pro 1 was the next one, yep. And we can go back to the Exotic Birds formation, and I can tell you how that synth thing happened and why I was interested in synths.
Well, can I ask you what your first synthesizer was? And I'm so sorry, Andrea, this is so nerdy and awful.
I'm so used to this.
I feel kind of dirty, but I'm sort of fizzing all over. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think that, so when I was in high school, I played in high school band, orchestra, youth symphony, all that kind of stuff. But I was still like a drum set player.
Yeah.
And I started to fall in love. When I got to the point where I could actually play well, I started to fall in love with prog.
So what bands were you really into?
Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Awesome. I mean, there you go. I can see the problem developing almost immediately.
So in junior high school, I go see Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Oh, wow.
On the, I think it was Brain Salad Surgery tour. Carl Palmer's massive rotating drum kit. And I'm like, yeah, but I can't help notice that giant synthesizer on the side of the stage. And I have actual pictures, and I have a photo album upstairs that I found a couple of weeks ago. There's the pictures that I took at that concert. And I was in like the second row. So Keith Emerson is using the ribbon controller, and he's like coming at me with the rhythm controller. And I'm like, what is that instrument? What is that? It's a synthesizer. And so as I learned every Emerson, Lake and Palmer song, the drum parts, here I am listening to synths. And then I got into like Yes. And that led to like Weather Report, like Fusion.
Yeah.
And Return to Forever with Chick Corea. Yeah. And it was just like synth.
Yeah.
I didn't actually own a synthesizer until college when we put Exotic Birds together. It was myself and 2 other percussionists. And for a joke, for the upcoming Halloween party, because we were so influenced by the music at the college radio station, right? I had never heard The Cure in my life. I'd never heard OMD. Wow. And we're like, let's dress up as punks, but for a twist, let's actually play. So we borrowed from a friend in the dorm an ARP axe and an ARP string ensemble. Right. And we borrowed a guitar and an amp, and we had a drum kit, and I wrote 3 punk pop synth, the keyboard player, he played the bass synth part with his left hand and played basic string lines. And we walked on stage for the costume competition after the 5th guy dressed as Darth Vader, because this was 1981. And we walk on stage, and they're dressed as punk rockers, Tim, Tom, and Andy. And everybody's looking at us because half the crowd were art students from the art school who were, in fact, punk rockers. And we're looking at us like, not even close, guys. But then the curtain opens, and there's the gear, and we run behind the gear, and we kick into these songs. And within about 20 seconds, the whole place, about 500 people, are pogoing.
Oh, awesome.
So and this was supposed to be a one-off. It was never, ever going to happen again.
So this is like synth punk type stuff. Did you know?
Yeah, it was like
Devo.
Well,
at that time?
Devo, yeah. I had seen Devo play in Cleveland in tiny clubs in the late 70s and early 80s, before they were, before Whip It was huge.
Yeah.
And you could see them kind of figuring out the costumes and figuring out the choreography. It was really, really interesting. And then the Byrds, you know, a year later, we get a record deal. We released a single, and it was huge on college radio. And then FM station in Cleveland picked it up. And so we started to get playlist listings in Billboard. You know, they would list their playlist. And here's Exotic Byrds, Dance the Night Away. Oh. And so we got this record deal with the subsidiary of RCA. We did a video for MTV, blah, blah, blah. So when things started to happen with the Byrds, I bought a Monopoly and an SH-101. Those are my first 2 synths.
Good
and I
choices.
still have them.
And both classics.
Yeah.
And
really
both
good
beautiful.
choices.
These early experiences we have, they sort of stay with you. Do you know what I mean? You must.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember to this day, another band that I saw was the Edgar Winter Group. You know the track Frankenstein?
Yes, absolutely.
And
that was a
classic,
2600, wasn't it?
2600. Yeah. And I just remember, to this day,
and
I remember
you had the
watching
long
them.
blonde hair.
Yeah. Yeah. But to this day, I remember seeing that gig, and I remember them playing Frankenstein, but it was like the 15-minute version of it. And, you know, just like Keith Emerson, you know, killing his organ and playing the ribbon controller, Edgar Winter was not nice to that 2600. No. And the sounds were just like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So,
and the weight of that controller he was wearing was probably not nice to his spine either. On reflection, we're talking. Yeah. Anyway, we must stop talking about synths just for a moment. So you guys have just released your Tiny Little Pieces maxi single. Before that, we had the Discotheque
EPs 1 and 2.
EPs 1 and 2, which we were very, very honoured to take part in the remix version of them. And that's released on vinyl. There it is.
There it is.
There it is. And that's available now, right? You can still get that band.
Yeah.
Where do we
Finally,
need to go?
it took like 8 months or something to come
in.
in.
Bandcamp.
Yeah. So why did it take so long? Was it just the standard lead time for...
Yeah, the backup of vinyl has been like insane over the last... I mean, it's just been getting worse for the last few years. It just takes forever.
I think it took a year.
Yeah. It's like
wow.
bonkers.
But you've had some news about
some success with one of the tracks.
Yeah, we had this other Moments of Madness single, and then this Revolution remix, which was like a really cool like strings remix that Andy did. It premiered on the season premiere of the Kardashians back in May.
That's amazing.
How did
you never know where things will end up?
I mean, how did that come about? Did somebody just come across it, or?
Well, once again, my TV connections.
Yeah.
One of the editors that I had worked with for years, I think he worked on Storage Wars too for a long time, is now the head editor on the Kardashians, and he's an old music. He's like my age. He's like all 80s. Loves the whole. We'll sit down and talk about the virgin prunes for an hour. Right? And so I sent him just a text one day and I said, hey, our stuff's on streaming, blah, 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 blah. And a year later, he texted me back and said, I really like this track, this remix of Revelation. I'm going to put it in the Kardashians and I'll let you know if it makes it to the final cut. And I was like, cool. And then an hour later, the music supervisor emails me. He's like, it's in the final cut. This is what we pay. This is what, it's
fantastic.
Fantastic. So
that's great.
That's amazing.
I wanted to ask, so I love Metaphysical. It's one of my favorites. And you have a really cool video for it as well. But it's the only video you guys have. And I wondered if you've got plans for doing more videos with your music as you go forward, because you've got a really cool aesthetic.
Well, we should talk about who helped us make that.
Well, sure. So you were talking about when we first started, you had been listening to some of our stuff and you thought it sounded great. It's all mixed by Sean Bevan. And Sean's a Cleveland guy who worked with Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson and Guns N' Roses. And he's been a great friend for a long time. And he's just super fantastic musician, person, mixer, engineer, arranger. And his wife, Juliet, directs videos.
Fantastic.
So we finished that EP and we reached out. We said, we're thinking about doing a video. And Juliet's like, I'll do it.
Oh, great.
And
I mean, your stuff sounds awesome. I'm a bit of a terrible control freak, and I also don't know what I'm doing.
I'm right there with you, brother.
Do you know what I mean? It's a constant learning process of trying to. The idea of giving things away, I wouldn't be able to trust anyone. I don't think. It's great that you've got someone that you trust. And Sean really understands your stuff. It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, normally I would just send him a reference mix. This is essentially the levels where everything needs to be level-wise. But when you compare my mix and then you compare it to his mix, and it's like, oh, look, bottom end. I don't have any of that. It doesn't exist. But he's got this way of just making everything, especially some of these tracks are super complicated. The synth parts are, there's way too much, I think, listening back. But he finds a way to make them all fit into the proper place.
Split them into their little sonic areas where they need to go.
Yeah.
Are you guys at the writing stage now? And how do you write?
Yeah.
Do you work together simultaneously, or?
It's everything. It's totally all over the place. Like
Yeah.
sometimes he'll be like, so you got any lyric ideas? And I'll be like, yeah, I was thinking about this concept. And he'd be like, I like this, that, I don't know. Let's try this thing. Oh, and I have this piece of this synth little riff I was working on the other day. Maybe it would fit into that. And then we expand it from there.
Yeah.
Or like, for like Die for Love, he sent me just this like the opening synth sound and then just some basic chords. And immediately I was like, oh, I got an idea for that. And then we expanded it. And then that one, I was like, I'm hearing strings because I'm a sucker for strings. I love strings. Yeah. And he's like, we're a synth pop band, Andrea. But then the next day he sent me like a track with strings at it. I'm like, see, it's beautiful.
Oh.
Well, the string thing for me, it sounds like, because I scored to picture orchestral scores. It's like, oh, strings, really?
Yeah.
This isn't for TV.
But on that song, it worked.
Synth pop band. But she was right, so...
Well, you would you?
Yeah, so it takes all kinds of forms.
Yeah. So would you generally go for a Selena instead of a real strings then?
Yes, but I think that she was hearing something that was way more emotional. Like a flowing like string section.
Yeah.
So you got that in. So you very much. I mean, this is obviously you inform each other. What's coming?
Absolutely. And then sometimes he'll have like almost like a full track, just the track. Like I think Metaphysical was pretty more formed as far as like the instrumental part.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think it had a bridge at that point, but it was like I got this track and I did like Metaphysical is hysterical because the synths at the beginning are all Bug Brand Frack Rack stuff. Right. And I don't know anybody that uses Frack Rack anymore. Right. We just had it and she just came up with these lyrics one night and I said, that's great. Let's just go from there.
So you started with it was very much the synth stuff was there already, and then you had some lyrics that came and sat over the top of it. Was that a fairly quick process then? Did it happen?
That one, I think it was interesting because it was like, sometimes it's that process of like figuring out what the like heart of the song is, the soul is, like the concept, and then after that, once you like really have that solid direction, then after that it went really quickly.
Okay,
because he had like the title is like Metaphysical, and at one point we were like, I don't know, what do we do with it? He's like, I don't know about this, and I was like, no, wait, I think it'll work. And then once it kind of figured out how it would work, then it went quickly.
Well, you guys were kind of talking about that yesterday. When you're talking about, you had tracks on the record that you were sure were going to make it. Now you're not so sure about it. It's tough. I mean, from day to day, opinions change. Oh, it's great. Oh, it sucks. Oh, it's great. Yeah, it sucks.
Some days your ears work. Some days they don't. And after doing an extended period of listening, sometimes you just really need to, I don't know, put on a couple of podcasts and not listen to any music for about a month.
Yeah.
Cleanse your palate with something completely different. I like the journey that bands go on. I like if you listen to the very first Radiohead record and then anything they've done recently, and it's like, this is not the same band. So I like, evolution. And in a sidebar here, when I was in the we did about 60 shows in the U.S. supporting Depeche Mode on the Songs in Faith and Devotion tour.
Oh, wow.
So I got to hang out with Alan Wilder and Martin and Dave, and I've sat on the side of the stage every single night unless we had to take the bus to go somewhere else. And that was another great synth moment, was just sitting there going, wow. And then Alan played drums a lot on that tour. I don't know if you saw it.
Yeah.
He's asking me drum advice, and I'm thinking, this is really weird.
So you guys, I mean, you say you haven't played live yet. Have you got? Are you planning or not?
I mean, we don't have any specific plans. I think it's one of those things that we would do if there was like a specific reason, like if somebody asked us to, that we kind of fell into.
Yeah, but we would definitely have to put some thought into it because I don't really want to just put a laptop out, hit play, and mime things. I want to play some stuff. It would be nice to have at least one female background singer, but to find somebody that can do what she does
Good
might
luck.
not be easy because Andrea's range is extraordinary. Her dynamics are extraordinary. She can belt it out or she can super soften. Her pitch is great. So, and that would take rehearsals. It would take time.
I feel for you. I know it's quite a...
There has to be a big motivation
step.
for taking that.
Yeah,
step.
and it's a big environment to try to have to replicate.
Completely.
A lot of dimension.
I mean, your stuff is massive, and you're going to have to think about are you going to have a live sound guy or woman to keep this sound intact? Because there's...
I think that would be a big problem there, and if we could get Sean Bevan to mix it live, we would just have Sean do it.
Yeah.
Because he used to mix my band Exotic Birds before he went out on the road with Nine Inch Nails. So Sean's now when he's not working in California, he's on the road with Filter as their front of house guy.
Right. Wow.
Are you both based in LA?
Sometimes.
I am permanent.
I was here until the pandemic, and then I moved out of state. But I'm kind of back and forth.
Yeah. So it's quite hard, kind of arranging time for you both to be in the studio together.
Somewhat. I mean, it's like this last time. I was like, okay, I'll be back next month, and then all these other things happened, and it was like 4 months.
When you do get that studio time, do you both kind of prepare stuff in secret and then bring it to the table? Like we've got this pile of stuff. Let's sift through it.
Yeah. I mean, like last time, I think I came back to it's like we had started on one new track, and we were just gonna finish final vocals on another, and like tweak some lyrics or something. So it's like while I went away, like I came back with more lyrics tweaked and then had another song prepped, but it really, like we were saying, it just kind of takes all different forms.
Yeah.
Just depending on what we've been coming up with.
Yeah.
But we have done some stuff remotely, like because I have a studio at my place too, and I have a recording booth and everything, and so I just lay down vocals at my place, send them over to him, he'll pop them in a remix and do it that way, just like everybody's doing these days.
Yeah.
So you're used to working remotely as well. Wow, you've really adapted very well.
Yeah. Well, so you guys, good luck with what you're working on now.
Thank you.
Enjoy the writing phase. It's always exciting seeing what will come out.
Yeah. See what.
I know.
We really look forward to seeing what journeys you take us all on in the coming, however long it takes.
Yeah.
And you guys too. I'm excited to hear your new record.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah.
man. Oh yeah.
Well, if you like evolving sounds, hopefully it is at least that. It's different. It's always different.
You're right. I mean, why would you want to sound the same for every track when you've got this limitless palette at your disposal? It just seems like a wasted opportunity, doesn't it?
Speaking of exploring, maybe we could have a little virtual explore of your studio.
Wow, your Madame Segway.
Yes.
This is fantastic.
Madame Segue. Just sliding in there.
Absolutely.
Give us a little peek around your studio, and then hopefully we'll be able to finish up with a look at your video, which
Metaphysical.
Have a look at Metaphysical. Can we do that later?
All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Right,
Cool.
take us round. Let's have a look at your stuff.
All right.
And here we go into my studio. My security guard, Dalek Sek. Good morning, Dalek Sek.
You would make a good Dalek.
Wow, thank you. I'll think about it. Anyway, this is the entrance to the studio. We've got some participation posters. This little bar area. Posters. Me with the. Me with Stabbing. Ready Festival 93. Various Doctor Who toys. Come in here. Some more participation things. Some of the tours we've done. Depeche Mode. Kiss. The Live. And of course, Storage Wars. Anyway, so here's the room. As you walk in, there's a vocal booth. A couple little modular rigs, Eurorack rigs on wheels that you can cart around if you want to pull them closer to the desk. Here's one of my Eurorack rigs, various modules from various manufacturers. Moog Mother 32s, there's 3 of those. There's a Schweiman S1 Mark II. A lot of Analog Solutions gear in this studio. A couple of Overcore sequencers, a couple of Nyborgs. Studio Electronics SE1. Custom-made Moon modular made by Gert Yalis in Berlin for me about 6 or 7 years ago. This is a funky synth here, the Apno synth. It's made by a South American manufacturer. More Analog Solutions, Vostok, the V1, Moog 1, Macbeth, M5N, another Oberkorn sequencer, my original vintage SH101. This is the Repop Oberheim 2-voice. This is System 3C and a System 55. These are reissues, not the originals, because that would be way too expensive. They still sound phenomenal, though. My original Pro Run, still use. Monopoly, still use. Various Eurorack stuff here. Vermona Performer. ARP 2600 clone. Ooh, I can turn this on. The pretty lights come on. And Black Corporation. This is various Eurorack percussion devices. This is the back end of the main Eurorack rig. These modules are just kind of sat there. None of them are really doing anything. Generally, I will just swap these out with, whatever I want to use. We come around here. This is the main Eurorack rig. More Moog stuff, drummer from another mother, Subharmonicon, etc. Analog Solutions, Mega City sequencer. I use this to clock pretty much everything in the studio because it accepts MIDI note 0. And then I'll use my DAW, which is not open right now. I would use my DAW and just control that, and then it clocks to everybody else. The new Intelligio Cascadia is a pretty cool thing. There's a whole bunch of these Korg SQ1 sequencers around the studio. Some Buchla, Syncussion. Main monitors are these guys, Barefoots. Fantastic. More Eurorack. Quite a bit of make noise stuff here. Strega, Zero Control, Zero Coast. More Analog Solutions, Leipzig, and the Impulse Command. And there's this guy that you turned me on to, the Malevolent. Where is it? There it is. And this guy's pretty fun too, the Noon. Here we go. Synths, Moog Matriarch, Sequential. This guy is fun. Thanks, Chris, for turning me on to this. Matrix Brute, Dominion, Macbeth Elements, the new Oberheim, kind of like it. Vintage Jupiter 8, Moog Grandmother, Vintage Prophet 5 Rev 3, reissue Mini Moog, GRP A4 synth and sequencer, my original Virus, my old original Nordlead, UDO Super 6, love it. Moog Voyager XL Anniversary Edition with the Patch Bay. This is a reissue System 15 Moog. Here's some vintage stuff. MS-20, MS-50, SQ-10, and the really freaky Solar 50 big ambient machine that has 50 oscillators. And coming down here, we have System 100M, just the basic system, no sequence or anything like that. My VCS3, OB1, DK1 and DK2 keyboards for the VCS3. This is the world of Frack Rack here, Bug brand, really cool stuff. Oberheim Expander, vintage Oberheim 4-voice with sequencer. More Analog Solutions stuff. The original fuse box, Kilpatrick Audio, Phenol, more frac rack. Some various other little ditties hidden around. And we'll walk back this way. And we have a second tier in the back. This is a new acquisition I literally just got a couple days ago. The Nina. I've yet to even patch it in. I'm just putting a new rack together out here because I'm running out of room. Telemark, more Analog Solutions. Arturia Mini Brute. Thank you, Chris, for the mod information. That's a great mod to turn the arpeggiator into a 64-step sequencer. Nifty keys. I just got this too. It's essentially a Eurorack case with a keyboard. I don't know how I missed this when it originally came out, but I did. Sub 37, OB6. Here's a fun thing. The Wasp Deluxe. Very cool. Korg Minilog. That's fairly useful. Really early vintage ARP Odyssey. This thing is so old it does not even have a serial number. The Oscar. Mini Korg 700 that I got from Soundgas in London. It's got a bunch of mods on the back, which makes it really cool. The Cat by Octave. Yamaha CS30, super cool. The ProMars Compuphonic. Thank you, Chris, for turning me on to this. I got this on Reverb for like less than $1,000. It's pretty awesome. Vermona DRM1 drum unit. And this is Drum Machine World here. Vintage DMX. This is the new Rossum SP1200 reissue. It's got a cool metal case now and a much, much, much enlarged memory. Here's my original vintage SP1200. Still use all these things. Vintage Lin, the newest Korg drum machine. And let's see, up here, there's a bunch of nooks and crannies where I've got little teeny tiny, a lot of like toy synthesizers and things in them. As my vintage ARP 2600 ARP sequencer. A Kai Timberwolf, $75 on Reverb. This little rig here, Moog Siren. This little guy here. The Arturia. Fairly useful thing. Another Eurorack rig. And that pretty much is the studio. I can give you like an overhead shot or two. And there you have it.